I turn to you, Lord, in times of trouble, and you give me the joy of salvation. Are we joyous that we have salvation or not? Well, most of the time we priests look a little solemn and somber, and most of the time the congregations do too, coming to Mass. I'd like everybody just to smile for a minute, to show that you really believe that we have the joy of salvation even in times of trouble. Do we or don't we? Do we look saved, or do we look like condemned prisoners taking our last mile? So we have to rejoice that we have salvation. Now, last week I addressed a very important issue on the freedom of religion and the healthcare issue, and I didn't think I'd ever have to address it again. But unfortunately, something happened last Sunday while I was preaching my little 2 cents worth here that is extremely disturbing to me, not as a priest, but as an American. So I have to readdress this issue. The government continues to define what religion is, and it confines it to the church, the house of worship, and grade school, and everything else is secondary that the church may be involved in, tangential, not essentially religious, and ultimately not essentially covered by the First Amendment, not only in regards to this current issue, but in the future, any other issue that might come up. And that's disturbing. Because you've heard from this pulpit over and over, in all the pulpits that you've ever sat before in your life as Catholics, that at the essence of the heart of Israel's prophetic message was, we have to take care of the weak, the widow, the orphan, the poor, the stranger in a strange land. And although the cultic aspect of the religion in the temple and the sacrifices were important, they didn't mean a thing to God if the poor were exploited, the orphans abandoned, the stranger in their land persecuted. None of those sacrifices would mean anything to Yahweh. And then in the New Testament, we have the Sermon on the Mount, and we have Christ's final sermon of the separation of the sheep and goats. And although what happens within the confines of these walls is sacred, is holy, is sacrosanct, is awesome, our ultimate salvation is going to depend on, did we clothe the naked? Did we feed the hungry? Did we visit the imprisoned? They're not something extra and not religious. They're at the heart of our religion. And within Catholicism, for the last 1,600 years, we always try to institutionalize the corporal works of mercy in order to make not a paradise on earth, but to make this earth just a little more bearable, a little more humane, a little more just. And they're at the heart of what it means to be a Catholic. They're not a tangential, unessential part of being Catholic, as is now being defined by the government. Think of this for a moment. Walsh University. How did it come about? Did it come about out of the air? No, a group of Christian brothers in New England dedicated their lives to the church and took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. They gave up family, children, personal wealth. They gave up sexual pleasure and sexual pursuits to live a life of celibacy, a life of holiness. And they came to our diocese and started a small college which they named after the local bishop, Bishop Walsh, Eminent Walsh. And it's grown into a very fine university. The government would say to those Christian brothers that did that, well, it was nice work you did, but it really wasn't essentially religious, because they never led the liturgy, never forgave sins, never conducted weddings. They never held funerals. Those are the things that religion does. Anything beyond that, well, it's nice, but it's not really religious. And ultimately, it's saying, not ultimately protected by the First Amendment. The hubris of the state to define what is religious and what is not, and what's essential to religion and what is not, is a profoundly disturbing thing. Now, in the case of health care, it goes back and forth. I don't understand what happened Friday. Basically, the president said, well, we're going to offer to everybody a very expensive product and nobody's going to have to pay for it. I don't know how that works. But I'm not really going to discuss that. But what actually happened last Sunday, February 5th, 2012, mark it on your calendar. Remember it. It was the day a powerful branch of the United States government suspended the First Amendment and ordered priests not to read from the pulpit the letter from their bishop. Never happened before in the history of America. It happened last Sunday, February 5th. The United States Army gave an order to the Catholic chaplains not to read a letter from their bishop. Did you ever think in your lifetime that any branch of government would tell any preacher from any faith under any circumstances what they could and could not do in the pulpit? I mean, I was reeling for about 3 days, sort of like numb, walking around, not as a priest, because as a priest I know the history of the church. This is the norm for the history of the church. But as an American, it had me stunned. And so you have to understand how the chaplaincy works in the military. Most people don't understand it at all. There is what we call a military ordinariate. It's a military diocese headed by a bishop. It's the largest Catholic diocese in the world. It covers every corner of the earth where there's a military installation or base. And every Catholic chaplain, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Army, is under the spiritual direction of their own bishop. The current military ordinariate is Bishop Broglio. And that chancery office does everything the chancery of Youngstown or any other diocese does. It takes care of dispensations and special needs of the clergy, spiritual needs of the clergy. It records all the weddings that take place in the military chapels around the world, and all the baptisms are sent back there just in case military bases close. So there's a record of everything that happens there spiritually. And so their bishop, like all the other bishops in all the other dioceses, sent out a letter to their priest to be read from the pulpit, similar to the one you heard read last week. The Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, no problem. The chaplains read it from the pulpit, as requested by their bishop. But the United States Army ordered the Catholic chaplains not to read the letter. They could talk about the letter, and they could even give it out at the back of the church if anybody wanted it. But they could not read it from the pulpit. Now, certainly within the military, there is less freedom of speech and freedom of political action than in civilian life. And that's essential to the salvation of our country, the defense of our country, and the civilian control over the military. But that has to do with military secrets. That has to do with the Army not backing one candidate or another. It does not have to do what happens in the pulpit. Now, I have never had the privilege of serving as a chaplain in the military. But for 7 years, I had the Saturday masses at a small fort in Brooklyn. And I had all the weddings and all the baptisms. And I worked with a lot of chaplains. And at one point, the military hired me to go to Korea to teach the soldiers not to go to prostitutes. It was a hard sell. But I have a sense of the inner workings of what takes place on bases in the United States or overseas because of that. Never in my wildest dreams that I or any chaplain think they'd get any order telling them what to do or not to do in the pulpit. Just astonishing. During World War II, one of the great catastrophes in human history, when we were fighting Nazism and Imperial Japan, the War Department and the military suggested to chaplains, and even urged them a little bit, to tell the troops we had God on our side. But they never ordered them to do that. They knew the chaplain would do what he wanted to do, what his faith compelled him to do from the pulpit. So if the chaplain wanted to say we have to love our enemies, do good to those who hate us, he was free to do that. There was no order. You're to tell this story that we have God on our side. So there was this big hubbub and to do. I mean, some of the Catholic chaplains didn't know what to do. They had the letter from their bishop. They had orders from the army. Some of them read the letter anyway. Others called up their bishop. Hey, what am I supposed to do? So Bishop Broglio met with the Secretary of the Army and discussed the issue. And the Secretary of the Army said, well, yeah, maybe it was a mistake to give that order. And they discussed the matter, and this week they got sort of permission from the Army, an astonishing thing, in order to be able to read the letter. Slightly modified out of dialogue with the Secretary of the Army because the Army didn't like the term, unjust law. What an astonishing event to take place on February 5th, 2012. Are the military chaplains going to have a list of forbidden words down the way? You can never say unjust law because that might be sedition against the United States. What is this? What does it mean? It means on February 5th, 2012, the First Amendment was suspended. Now, was there a formal apology? No. Was anybody reprimanded for sending the order? No. But now, there's a second level of problems. The state of the Catholic priest who actually read the letter. Where are they at? The Army can take action against them. They can court-martial them. The silly Army has this hang-up about following orders. I don't know where that could come from. They could be court-martialed. They won't be. They won't be. For political reasons. Everybody's just hoping this will go away. It'll disappear. That's what they're hoping. But there's something else that will happen, and I'm pretty certain this will happen. We have one of the best militaries in the world, if not the best, because there's promotion by merit. Every now and then, an incompetent person gets through. But promotion by merit happens this way. From privates to generals, everybody's performance is evaluated, chaplains included. And every 6 months or so, you have go through a military evaluation. I remember one chaplain sitting down, and he went over his evaluation with me, and he had mostly strong points. But under physical fitness, rated from 1 to 10, he had 1. And so, you'd say, how could I improve my performance in all of these areas? And when it comes time for promotion, they look at all of these reports and decide whether to promote or not. And so, say you're a major and your time comes up to be a lieutenant colonel. And they pass over you. You don't make the grade, as we say, even in civilian life now. You don't go up 1 grade. Well, it's not the end of your career because many people don't make the grade the first time around. They say, you've got to improve in areas A, B, C. But the second time you come up for the promotion to lieutenant colonel, if you do not make it, you are out of the Army because they want more dynamic, creative, growing officers. Now, what's going to happen in the case of these priests? It's most likely it's going to go on their permanent record. Disobeyed orders, February 5th, 2012. And a funny thing, and of all the things on your evaluation, from your physical fitness to your service to the Corps, that's going to jump out like a huge red flag. Will they make their next grade? Who knows? Will they be out after 2 cycles of promotions? Probably. Will this hurt the church? No. Because these priests will just go back to their parish, their religious order. They'll continue to serve the kingdom of God in all the sacramental ways we priests do. But it'll hurt the army. Because of this, they will have been deprived of the service of these soldier chaplains. Now, because of that, what has happened? The diocese, the military diocese, has sent a telephone number to all the Catholic chaplains saying, if anything like this happens, call it immediately and you'll be given legal counsel with experts in this area. Did you ever think that it would come to a point in United States history that a Catholic priest would need legal backup for reading a letter from one of his bishops? It's just astonishing. Not as a Catholic priest. I could tell you about the Kulturkampf, the cultural battle in 19th century Germany when their best chancellor ever, Bismarck, went on a war against Catholicism in Prussia, closed down 3,000 churches. As a Catholic priest, I say, oh, what else is new? Government interfering with religion. But as an American, I said, February 5th, 2012, Catholic chaplains were ordered not to read a letter from their bishop. God have mercy on our country. Now this brings us to a question. What would we sacrifice the First Amendment for? If everybody was promised total personal health care for free forever, if they just gave up their freedom of religion, would we do it? If we were promised, total employment for every healthy person and a roof over every single person's head, but just give up freedom of speech and freedom of worship, would we do it? Now, millions of people in our land would say, yes, we'll give that up. It doesn't affect me. But if that comes about, something else will have happened. America will cease to be America. And that won't be necessarily a loss for the church, but a great loss for humanity. Here we have had all the time, up until last Sunday, what we thought was an absolute assurance that the government would never interfere with religion. And I've always preached, I'm so lucky to be a member of the United States where we have freedom of speech and freedom of religion. But now when I preach on it, I'm saying we're so lucky to be members of the United States where more often than not we have freedom of speech and freedom of religion. God have mercy on the land that we love. But finally, I have to say to you, in times of trouble, let us rejoice and be glad, because salvation is ours.